So the book I'm looking at now is the Bhagavad Gita, and it's a fascinating text. I read it a couple times a long time ago when I was starting looking at spiritual concepts, and I don't remember it being so rich. But as with many of these texts, they find you when you're ready for them. What strikes me about the Bhagavad Gita is it's a condensation of almost all noetic perennial concepts into one short but epic sermon by the avatar of Brahma, Lord Krishna. Among more concepts than I mentioned here, but most notable to me so far, are the assertion that there is an unchanging metaphysical reality. I really like that one. Selfless action in the name of God, finding true peace in transcendence of earthly temptations, the highest value of the good. What are the practices that connect you to the divine? What is the progression of connecting to the divine? The types of enlightenment, studied or instant, incarnation of God, that the kingdom of heaven is always at hand, return of the Messiah, death and afterlife, reincarnation, revelation, and finally that we are an expression of God himself, Tat Tvam Asi. I'm using two versions of the Bhagavad Gita, and this one is by a scholar called Eknath Iswaran. I think that's how you say it. This is really good. That's the one that's in my thumbnail in the previous YouTube. And of course, Stephen Mitchell, who is the translator of my favorite version of the Tao Te Ching. And I think I probably mentioned at some point, Stephen Mitchell didn't translate directly from Chinese. He took all the versions that had already been translated and then pared them down into something really succinct. And he does, I think, the same thing with this. It's really easy to read. So I'd like to read part of the introduction from the Iswaran version, and this is discussing what I just said, that it's an extremely important perennial text. The Vedas all have one unmistakable hallmark, the vivid stamp of personal mystical experience. These are records of direct encounter with the divine. Tradition calls them shruti, literally heard as opposed to learned. They are their own authority. I think all the texts that we're looking at, or that I'm looking at here, are shruti texts. So that's a really good word to know in terms of this particular project. In the literal sense, the Gita too is shruti, owing its authority not to other scriptures, but to the fact that it set down the direct mystical experience of a single author, Shankara, a towering mystic of the 9th century AD, whose word carries the authority of Augustine, Eckhart, and Aquinas all in one, must have felt this, for in selecting the minimum sources of Hinduism, he passed over almost 100 Upanishads of Vedic authority to choose 10 central Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. So that kind of goes back to what I was saying, that everything is in the Bhagavad Gita. In the second chapter, after the stage is set, Arjuna, the warrior, the most competent warrior on one side, has surveyed who he's going to be fighting and sees all his uncles and cousins. And so he's despondent. And Krishna, the charioteer, begins his sermon in chapter 2. And in this chapter, numerous spiritual concepts are described, including, and what I want to talk about in this video, the idea of working without being attached to outcome. You have the right to work, but never to the fruit of work. You should never engage in action for the sake of reward, nor should you long for inaction. Perform work in the world, Arjuna, as a man established within himself, without selfish attachments, and alike in success and defeat. For yoga is perfect evenness of mind. So that first thing that comes to mind for me is the Zen aphorism, before enlightenment, drawing water and chopping wood. After enlightenment, drawing water and chopping wood. This, I think, is selfless action. Because on the one hand, you're drawing water and chopping wood because you want that bucket of water and you want those logs over there, and that's all you're doing it for. And in the other way of acting, you are doing these for the sake of the action, for the satisfaction of acting, and almost, I guess you could say, a ritual. Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita makes it clear that to become one of his chosen, you would be thinking of him with everything you do. And keeping Krishna in your mind, your work will be the fullest, the highest quality. You won't just be going from point A to point B, whatever way it takes you, and neglecting certain things and doing it in a slapdash way because you just want to get it done. You will be doing it well. In a practical sense, I think this means that when you become engrossed in an act, you don't really care about the outcome. You care about the work. The outcome vanishes in your mind with that engrossment. It's human nature to be goal-directed. In fact, we're wired that way, as countless neuroscientists demonstrate. And as Persig explained in Lila, the whole universe is constantly being pulled towards what's better. But there's a difference in being pulled towards what's better and having a preconceived notion that you're trying to get to, a big difference. And I think if you have a set picture, a preconceived idea of what you want to achieve, then when it doesn't work out, you're going to have some suffering, some dukkha, right? This is where frustration comes in when, say, you're trying to complete a task on your computer and the computer crashes and you have to start all over again. Or even a much higher level of suffering. Say you have cancer and you do everything you can to fight that cancer and it returns. So there's small-scale frustrations and then there's big suffering. And they can be dealt with in different ways. The small-scale frustration, you have a different attitude. When one door closes, the other opens, for example. Or you learn patience, which a lot of these spiritual practices, the essence of them is to learn patience. Big disappointments and true suffering means the adoption of a more transcendent attitude, that we are one with Brahma, or God, or Source, as Rick Rubin sees it, or quality, as Persig sees it, or the good, as Plotinus sees it, in both life and death. We are a continuing line, and we're just passing through. And when these bodies are gone, we reunite with our true selves, with God. And in a way, the two attitudes are very similar. You're giving up materialistic notions, you're relinquishing them for a higher plane. This first chapter discusses both of these copes, and when I say copes, I mean this facetiously, of course. Dealing with frustration and with mortality are two sides of the same coin. Living more intentionally, caring about what you do, learning patience and curiosity, making the best choices based on what strikes you at the moment is actually a way to live all the time. In fact, much of Persig's work is trying to convey that if you care about what you're doing, your life is meaningful despite inevitable hardship. But ideas of what you must do, what you need to do, based on, say, getting ahead financially or professionally, or what you're doing to avoid something, fear, and fear especially, because this attitude requires a kind of surrender to the unknown, at least unknown in terms of materialistic cause and effect. All these so-called imperatives of how we need to act have to be seen for what they are, which isn't easy, because we're kind of programmed this way. We're living in a materialistic understanding of reality. Even in this corner, we're transcending that. Most of the world operates like this. So practicing and understanding this is critical to living in a more complete way, even when you're surrounded by this way of understanding. So let me read 2 stanzas from chapter 2 of the Mitchell version. The wise man lets go of all results, whether good or bad, and is focused on the action alone. Yoga is skill in actions. The wise man whose insight is firm, relinquishing the fruits of action, is freed from the bondage of rebirth and attains a place beyond sorrow. We'll leave the concept of rebirth out for this moment, but the place beyond sorrow is what we're talking about. If you are not attached to the outcome, there is no reason to be sorrowful if your actions don't result in that. Yoga means a path towards the divine, which is what we're talking about, that transcendence. And this way of operating, again, is completely divorced from the modern materialistic way of acting. Now here's a personal example from this channel. I get bogged down with the avalanche on YouTube and otherwise of interpretations of things I'm reading and thinking about that are far more intelligent, academic, and insightful. Yet, when I just follow my own thing, my own interests and connections that I make, I can forget all that stuff and just do my thing. And I'm much happier. Now, this method doesn't result in material outcomes such as a profitable channel, an extremely popular channel, an authoritative channel. It doesn't solidify my brand. But it is satisfying and personally edifying. And my rough aim, since we're humans, we always have an aim when we're doing things, is wisdom. So maybe it'll work out. So I hope that makes sense, and I'll see you next time.